Imagine, if you will, Florence in 1505. It's the peak of the Renaissance. Da Vinci is busy hiding secret codes and salads. Michelangelo is arguing with ceilings, and everyone is obsessed with perspective. And then, there is Giovanni. Poor, unfortunate Giovanni. He is a man of artistic passion, a man of deep, soulful vision, and a man whose hand possesses the spatial awareness of a toddler on a sugar rush during an earthquake. While his peers are obsessing over the golden ratio, that divine mathematical proportion, Giovanni is busy drawing circles that look like depressed potatoes. He once tried to draw a simple column for a local merchant and accidentally created a structure that looked like it was melting in a microwave. He is the only artist in history whose perspective is best described as early-onset seasickness. How does one survive in an era defined by geometric precision when your own limbs are practically allergic to linear geometry? To understand Giovanni, you have to understand the pressure of the Renaissance. This was an era where if you couldn't draw a perfect triangle, you were basically cast into the Tiber to be eaten by eels. Giovanni was born into a family of legendary stonemasons who could carve a straight line into a block of marble just by looking at it aggressively. His father, Papa Botticelli Not, once straightened a crooked bridge just by sighing at it. Giovanni, however, came out of the womb drawing squiggles. In school, his teachers thought he was inventing a new form of avant-garde expressionism, but really, he was just struggling with basic motor skills. He tried to study the works of Vitruvius, the Roman architect whose books on proportions were the Bible of the day. But every time Giovanni held a compass, his wrist would perform a frantic, unprovoked jazz hand maneuver. He once famously attempted a portrait of a noblewoman and ended up giving her 3 nostrils and a jawline that suggested she was currently being compressed by a hydraulic press. He was banished from the Guild of St. Luke, the official painters' guild, not for lack of talent, but because his lines were so crooked they were giving the local bishop an ocular migraine. Life for Giovanni was a series of narrow escapes. He lived in a cramped garret above a bakery, where the smell of sourdough bread served as the only comfort for his bruised ego. He spent his days sketching in secret, hiding his notebooks beneath floorboards whenever he heard the heavy footsteps of the city watch or, worse, a group of art critics. He tried to mimic the masters. He sat in the shadow of the Duomo, squinting at the perfect symmetry of Brunelleschi's dome, trying to convince his hand to cooperate. "Focus, Giovanni," he would whisper to his own wrist, shaking it like a bottle of spoiled wine. "Just once. One straight line. Give me a horizon that doesn't look like a mountain range." But the hand refused. It had a mind of its own, a mischievous spirit that thrived on curves and chaos. Now, it's 1505, and Giovanni has landed the commission of a lifetime. Lorenzo the Loud, a man whose wealth is only matched by his extreme irritability, has hired Giovanni to paint a fresco of the Last Supper for his private villa. Lorenzo is a devotee of linear perspective, the new, hot, trendy technique that makes paintings look like you could literally walk into them. If a single line in that painting is off-center, Lorenzo has vowed to feed the artist to his pet ostrich. Yes, he owns an ostrich. It's a very weird time in Italy. Lorenzo had imported the bird from Africa, claiming it was a symbol of his worldly status. But in reality, the bird spent most of its time trying to swallow expensive jewelry and hissing at the servants. Giovanni stares at the wall. The wall is 12 feet wide. It requires perfect, long, horizontal lines to define the floor and the ceiling. To Giovanni, these lines are not just lines, they are mortal enemies. Every time he places his brush against the plaster, his arm locks up, twitching in a way that suggests he's trying to swat a phantom fly. He tries to draw a floorboard, and it curves like a banana in a heat wave. If he paints it, the perspective will be so warped that the apostles will look like they are dining on the ceiling while standing on the walls. He is doomed. He spends the first few nights sleeping on the scaffolding, staring at the blank, unforgiving white plaster. He dreams of straight lines coming to life, snakes of pure geometry coiling around his neck, choking the creativity out of him. He wakes up in a cold sweat, his fingers tracing invisible zigzags across his bedsheets. Giovanni doesn't give up. He tries everything. First, he builds a giant wooden rig, a series of pulleys and ropes designed to hold his arm perfectly still. He calls it the straightener. It consists of a series of counterweights and a leather harness that looks suspiciously like a torture device from the Spanish Inquisition. It works for exactly 3 seconds before the ropes snap, causing him to catapult a bucket of blue pigment directly into Lorenzo's favorite velvet doublet. Lorenzo is not amused. The ostrich is currently eyeing Giovanni's left ear. The bird lets out a low, guttural croak that sounds suspiciously like a death sentence. Lorenzo's face turns a shade of purple usually reserved for grapes and angry royalty. He storms out, shouting about the price of silk and the incompetence of the lower classes, leaving Giovanni to clean the blue mess off the floor with his own tunic. Next, Giovanni tries the drunken master approach. He thinks, if I move fast enough, maybe the line won't notice it's supposed to be straight. He dashes across the scaffolding, paint flying everywhere like a possessed whirlwind. The result is a series of lines that look like a heart monitor during a high-speed chase. It's a disaster. He tries using a giant ruler, but his hand curves around it like he's trying to stroke a snake. He tries painting with his feet, his nose, and even, at one point, using a trained pigeon to hold the brush, but the bird has a vendetta against symmetry. The walls are now covered in what looks like a map of a very confusing subway system. It is a masterpiece of geometric anxiety. The table at which the apostles sit appears to be collapsing into a black hole. The windows in the background seem to be melting like butter on a hot skillet. The studio has become a tomb of failed artistic endeavor. The air is thick with the smell of turpentine and desperation. Giovanni is starving, having spent his last coin on pigments that he's currently using to decorate the floor instead of the wall. He hears the heavy, rhythmic thud of Lorenzo's boots coming down the hall. The ostrich's sharp, clicking claws follow behind like the percussion section of a funeral procession. The situation is objectively hopeless. Giovanni grabs his brush, not to paint, but to defend himself. He stands before the wall, shivering, prepared to be torn apart by a bird with a bad attitude and a patron with no sense of humor. As Lorenzo kicks open the studio door, ready to unleash the ostrich, he stops dead. The ostrich, sensing a lack of immediate violence, begins to peck at a stray grape on the floor. Lorenzo looks at the wall. He looks at Giovanni. He looks back at the wall. The silence in the room is deafening. Giovanni, shaking in his boots, waits for the inevitable execution. He closes his eyes, bracing for the impact of a beak or a heavy velvet sleeve. But Lorenzo isn't angry. Lorenzo is crying. It is a soft, wet, pathetic sound. Lorenzo points to the wall with a trembling finger. It's beautiful, Lorenzo sobs. The way the lines curve. The way the floor seems to be melting. It's not just a painting. It's a representation of the soul's instability in a chaotic world. It's existential cubism. Giovanni opens one eye. He looks at the wall, then at the weeping man. He realizes that in his terror, he hadn't just painted lines. He had projected his own internal panic onto the plaster, creating a dizzying, swirling landscape of emotional distress. To a man as erratic as Lorenzo, who spent his days chasing exotic birds and trying to impress the Medici family, the painting resonated with a deep, hidden truth he didn't even know he possessed. Lorenzo wipes his eyes with a silk handkerchief. I feel it, Giovanni. I feel the gravity shifting. I feel as though I am standing on the deck of a ship during a tempest. You haven't captured a meal. You've captured the feeling of being alive in a world that refuses to stand still. You see, by complete accident, Giovanni had invented a style of art that wouldn't actually be popular for another 400 years. Lorenzo thinks Giovanni is a visionary genius ahead of his time. He's not a bad artist. He's a post-Renaissance deconstructionist 5 centuries early. The ostrich looks confused and just eats a nearby curtain, but Lorenzo doesn't even notice. He is too busy staring into the warped, wobbly abyss of the Last Supper. So, Giovanni becomes the most famous artist in Florence. He starts charging double for his signature wobbly lines. He stops trying to fix his condition and starts marketing it as the Botticelli knot effect. He sells paintings to the Pope, who insists they make him feel wonderfully dizzy, and to local dukes who use them as conversation pieces to confuse their guests. He lives out his days in luxury, never having drawn a straight line, while his rivals, Da Vinci and Michelangelo, continue to stress out about their boring, perfect, straight circles. Giovanni wears velvet, drinks the finest wine, and occasionally laughs when he sees a master trying to measure a horizon with a compass. The moral of the story? If you can't fit into the box society builds for you, just draw the box with such weird, crooked lines that everyone decides the box was the problem all along. Also, never underestimate the power of a wealthy patron with absolutely zero taste. Giovanni died a wealthy man, leaving behind a legacy of paintings that still make historians go, "Wait, did he have a stroke, or was this a profound artistic choice?" The world may never know, but the ostrich is probably still out there, somewhere, judging our perspective. He left behind a studio filled with half-finished masterpieces, all of them bending towards some invisible center of gravity that only Giovanni could see. His apprentices tried to emulate him, but they couldn't capture the raw, terrified honesty of his shakes. They were just too steady, too precise, too boring. Giovanni remained the king of the crooked, the master of the melting horizon, the man who proved that you don't need a steady hand to change the world. You just need a wall, a bucket of paint, and a client who is just as confused as you are. Thanks for watching, and remember, keep your lines crooked and your expectations low.